Hi friends, welcome to the Critical Urban Education Speaker Series event. Thank you so much for joining us. The event that you're here to see today is Healing America's Racial Divisions in the Age of Coronavirus with Dr. Sean Ginwright, featuring Dr. Farima Khurshid and Dr. Christina Villarreal. I'm Dr. Tanya Maloney, and I'm joined today with my co-moderator, Dr. Bree Pickauer. We are both faculty at Montclair State University in the Department of Teaching and Learning, where we also co-direct the New York Teacher Project, and we are the co-directors of the Critical Urban Education Speaker Series, or CUE for short. And so this forum provides a space for us to develop our critical, racial, cultural, political analysis through various events, workshops, lectures, focused on issues that all of our communities are facing, particularly urban communities and our schools, and how we can address some of these issues together.
So welcome and thank you so much for joining us for today's event. Today's event and the trajectory of today's event has really followed what's been happening in the world around us over the last several months. We initially planned this event to be live in person here in New Jersey, where Dr. Maloney and I are, in March, and then coronavirus came, and we had to postpone those plans and decided to today host this webinar, really thinking about the racialized impact that coronavirus has had on communities of color. And so that was the plan for our conversation today. And then we sit here now in a different place than we were last week, with continued and amplified police brutality towards African Americans, and an amplified uprising and resistance and movements across the United States. And we find ourselves in this present moment. And we're very grateful that we already had this event planned so that we could hold a space to deepen our analysis of the way that structural, institutional, and historical violence against people of color has led us to this moment that we find ourselves in. This isn't a new moment. This is a path that we have been on. And so we're grateful that we're here today together with such brilliant thought leaders to help us think about the ways that we can deepen our analysis and think about where we can go from here. So thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, you know, I was talking to Dr. Pickauer as we were planning this particular event, and I was saying, look, I need this event just as much as anyone that's signing up. I am literally signed up for this event. And I thank you for joining us and being in community as we have this conversation. And it starts with us acknowledging the traditional, ancestral, and stolen territories across which the presenters are learning, working, and organizing today. This includes the land of the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape people of the Algonquin Nation on the land also known as New Jersey, the Massachusetts people of what is called Massachusetts, the Ohlone people in what is also known as the Bay Area. Each of these sovereign nations have stewarded the lands we now occupy since time immemorial. And we seek to be in solidarity with these nations and other indigenous communities in their most pressing struggles, whether that is to fight for the federal recognition of the Ohlone people or against the recent removal of the Mashpee Wampanoag land from federal land trust. As we recognize the disproportionate effects of COVID-19 on communities of color and those living in poverty, we recognize that if Native American tribal lands were treated as states, the 5 most infected states in the US would all be tribal lands. We take this opportunity to recognize the continued struggle, the continued survival of indigenous peoples, despite the systems of global imperialism that have sought to destroy their livelihoods. We encourage all participants, all of us, to continue to learn about whose land you are on and the specific struggles of your local indigenous communities. And as we continue to have this conversation, and we continue to think about what are the things that we can do to provide relief for folks, there are 2 organizations that we are asking folks to consider making a donation to. Now, look, this is a free event, as you all know, and so this is an encouraged donation. And so in order to use these QR codes that you see here, what you can do is use the camera function on your cell phone and point it at your screen now. Thank you, Dr. Pickauer, for demonstrating. And so when you point it at the QR code, the web page will open up and you can learn more about these two organizations and consider giving a donation. And we are going to continue on. So if you're figuring out your camera and starting to point it at the screen and you miss it, you can find this information on our Facebook page as well.
So a lot of people supported this event happening today. We're very grateful to all of the people who are listed on this screen. It's definitely a collective effort. So thank you to all the individuals who have supported this event for happening and for the different departments at the Montclair State University who have sponsored this event. We appreciate your efforts. So as Tanya said, this is the Critical Urban Education Speaker Series. If you're going to be posting about today's event, we encourage you to use the hashtag. And again, we are live streaming at the link that you see here. So if a friend of yours was unable to get on, please feel free to share that link with them. You can screenshot this, post this, so that people can watch along, and it will remain on the Facebook page for 48 hours after this event. You can also like us on Facebook so that you can keep up. We have events twice a year, so keep up with us to find out what future events we'll be holding. So you are here for this specific agenda. This is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be starting, as we start all of our Q events, by lifting up youth voices. So we have two incredibly talented poets who are here with us today, Fajr and Kalia, who will be performing for us to get us started. And then Dr. Jinwright is going to be sharing his radical healing framework for us, and he'll be speaking for about 30 minutes, at which point he will be joined with two of the most brilliant and badass scholar activist organizers that I know, Dr. Farima Khorshid and Dr. Villarreal, who will be having a discussion with Sean, thinking about the themes that he's talking about and how they connect to teacher education and to teaching and to schools. And so that's going to be a really engaging part of the event today, is that discussion. At which point Dr. Maloney and I will join back on. We will ask a few questions that come up from the Q&A button below. We do not have the chat going because we really are encouraging people to stay focused on the words of the speakers, but there is an opportunity to ask questions. So you can go ahead and put those questions in, and Tanya and I will be choosing just a few of them. We're not going to have a lot of time for that. After the Q&A portion, we are extraordinarily fortunate that Lauren Adams of Soul Development in Oakland is going to be joining us and closing out our event with her music and with a musical performance. So we're looking forward to closing out with that. And immediately after her performance, the event will end and you'll be taken to an evaluation page. If you're watching on Facebook, we will link the evaluation form there. We really want your feedback. We use it to plan all of our future events.
All right, so it's time to get this started. I'm so excited to introduce Fajr Kegler. She's an 18-year-old student born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, and is just a few months away from receiving her associate's degree in liberal arts. She's one-fourth of the Youth Slam team, Asada's Children. Love that. Fajr and her teammates were crowned 4th place in an international competition last summer. She's performed at Howard University, she's performed in Las Vegas, and countless places in and around the great city of Newark. And aside from poetry, she enjoys graphic and web design and has self-produced music on all streaming platforms. Check her out. But now you'll get to hear from Fajr Kegler.
Fajar, we cannot hear you. I'm so sorry, Fajar. Something's happening with the sound on your end.
No, we're still having trouble hearing you.
Fajar, we're going to ask that you try to log off and log back in. And we will move to Kalia's poem, and then hopefully you'll be back and the connection will be working and we'll be able to hear your poem. We'll make space for it at some point today. I don't know how, but we're going to have your voice on here. Thank you. All right, so with that, with that, I am so thrilled to be introducing our next poet. If you are friends with Farima Porkhorshid on Instagram or social media, like me, you have had the pleasure of watching Kalia Vernon grow up on social media. Kalia is a graduating senior from Tennyson High School in Hayward, California. She is Dr. Porkhorshid's auntie, and she has learned from the spaces that her auntie has been involved with and connected with, such as Teachers for Social Justice, the People's Education Movement, Camp Achilles, Sisterhood Now, and more. We are thrilled that she will be attending Sacramento State University in the fall, where she will be, she plans to major in sociology and minor in ethnic studies. And after this piece, you will certainly understand why. So
first, I wanted to say how honored I am to share my poem with you all. And I wanted to thank Dr. Jinwright for creating Camp Achilles. So when I first wrote this poem, I wanted to distinguish between histories and her stories, because the stories of women have been silenced for generations. But after sharing it for the first time, one of my high school friends lovingly reminded me that the stories of non-binary people throughout history and even now are never centered, which I will refer to as their stories, because the feature is non-binary, and that to me is ethnic studies. So my poem is called Ancestral Knowledge. Ethnic studies, our histories, her stories, and their stories in art form. A mosaic of colorful stories that shine despite being silenced or whitewashed in this country, where the resistance and resilience of people of color serve as a tessera it was built upon. My history, the histories, her stories, and their stories of my people, Nicaraguan, Belizean, Black, and Iranian. The histories, her stories, and their stories of all oppressed people in between. The ones that I was never taught in school, the ones that were banned in the state of Arizona, the ones that still fight to be considered worthy as a school requirement. They say ethnic studies is anti-American, that the classes are hateful and that they teach resentment. That ethnic studies, yes, ethnic studies, is racist and discriminatory to other ethnic groups. But I ask, why do they not think the same when centering Eurocentric history, a history of violence, of rape, of colonization, of genocide, of enslavement, of white supremacy, of historical oppression, created by ideological oppression that led to internalized oppression, that led to interpersonal oppression, that gets recycled through institutional oppression, that becomes a never-ending cycle of racial and gender trauma for people on the margins, for generations upon generations upon generations until we unlearn their history. America's Eurocentric history can never teach me about the legacy of our ancestral brilliance, because it is a history that teaches me to hate myself, that teaches us to hate ourselves, that teaches us to hate one another. Their history and their education was never meant to empower us. Their history was always meant to teach us to fear them, to know our place in their system, to memorize the dates that they conquered our people and then grade us on our complacency. When our people learn ethnic studies, we learn to think critically about issues from our dark past in society. We become empowered to take action, and that scares them. That threatens their systems of oppression. So when we ask for ethnic studies to be implemented into schools, we are tired of hearing that there is no funding, when we know the US has money for wars, for police, for prisons, for detention centers, for walls, to block people from refuge as they hoard the stolen indigenous land. You see, I may not be old enough to vote, but I am old enough to pay taxes. Taxation without representation. I need my education, an education for liberation, an education that is culturally responsive, an education that will abolish schooling, that will dismantle oppression. You see, US schooling colonizes our people over and over and over again. US schooling funnels our people into prisons. US schooling dehumanizes our people, strips us of our indigenous languages, beliefs, practices, and wisdom. So I remind myself why they won't teach us the histories, her stories, and their stories of our people until college. And then I remind myself that it is because they make sure not all of us get to college. And then I remind myself that even if we do make it to college, college is not accessible to all, affordable to all, attainable for all. They are institutions that are discriminatory. They were never made for me, made for us. Institutions that will leave us buried in debt simply for not wanting to be buried in assimilation. So this is how they get us, making us pay for ancestral knowledge that rightfully belongs to me and you. You see, ethnic studies happens beyond school walls. Ethnic studies happens at our dinner tables, at our family parties, at the cemetery, in our neighborhoods, at our prison visits with loved ones. Ethnic studies is about identity and power, a reflection of ourselves seen through our ancestors. I am a part of the class of 2020, one that will go down in history, her story, and their story. One that survived a global pandemic and resisted anyway. One that got inspired to reimagine our world, one that revolutionized their education, one that embodies their ancestors' wildest dreams. So with them, we will lead, we will create, we will thrive. Thank you.
Yes, sis. Yes. Thank you so much for your powerful poem. I mean, thank you so much for continuing to also create history, her story, and their story, Kalia. We're so excited for you as you continue on in your career. Thank you so much for joining us. Wow, that was really powerful. Thank you so much. And so Fajra has joined us again. And so we're going to go ahead and throw it back to her. And we're looking forward to hearing this piece. Fajra.
Hello, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, perfect. Yeah, so this is a piece that I wrote. This is a piece that I wrote for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I perform this piece a lot during Black History Month, but it is relevant all year round. As we all know, Black History Month is every month, and especially right now in this time period of our lives, I feel like this is a piece that's very relevant to what's going on around us with the protests and things of that nature. So it's rather short, but I'm just gonna get right into it. One of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther King Jr. reads as follows: "If you cannot fly, then run. If you cannot run, then walk. If you cannot walk, then crawl, but by all means, keep moving. Keep moving because every second that you spend still, a revolution is waiting to happen. Keep moving because there are people that are younger than you fighting for a planet that you helped destroy, just as there are people that died fighting to give you the right to do so. Keep moving because the problem of the 21st century has long surpassed the problem of just the color line. I believe that when King says to keep moving, he's speaking to every individual in this generation and the next. He's speaking to those of us who are fighting for racial equality, just as he's speaking to those of us who are fighting for global preservation. He says keep moving because now there are places where we both cannot drink from the same water fountains. Martin says keep moving because he knows that just because we have listeners does not mean that we are being listened to. Keep moving means to be aware of the school to prison pipeline, and that it is indeed a red line that has been negligently crafted with lead-filled pipes that seems to only exist in our gentrified and soon to be gentrified communities. Keep moving because we live in a world where too often are our actions reduced to objects for transportation. Because rush hour traffic is no longer the only form of trafficking that has been forced upon us. Martin says, by all means, keep moving. Keep moving because you can. Keep moving because you are no longer being forced to be still. Keep moving because we live in a world where today, not only can we crawl, but we can walk. And not only can we walk, but we can run. And not only can we run, but we can fly. So for the sake of Martin Luther King Jr., and what would have been his 92nd year alive, pursue whatever dream it is that you may have, but by all means, please keep moving. Thank you.
Thank you, sis. Thank you, Fajer, for that poem. We really need all of these words today. Thank you for both of you. And at this time, we're gonna go ahead and get started with Dr. Sean Ginwright. He has an incredible bio, and we know him as one of the nation's leading thought leaders on African-American youth activism, and youth development. He is a professor of education in the Africana Studies Department, and senior research associate at San Francisco State University. Dr. Ginwright is founder and chief executive officer of the Flourish Agenda, and he is the author of many texts, including Hope and Healing in Urban Education, a text that I use in my classes, Black Youth Rising, Activism and Radical Healing in Urban America, and Black in School. And he is also the co-editor of Beyond Resistance. I'm so excited to be joined today with Dr. Ginwright and look forward to his words.
Thank you, Tanya and Bree and Kalia and Fadra. That was amazing. And it really gives me hope and just lifts my spirits to know that that your generation is asking and moving and fighting for justice and for the right path that we need to be going down. So your words were just really uplifting and really on time. So thank you for thank you for your words. I really needed that during this time. I'm going to talk to you today both from my head and my heart. I am deeply troubled, and I'm troubled for a number of reasons, but I'm going to try to stay focused. But I got to be honest with you, man. I am really troubled. We are in an unprecedented time that feels as if it feels like this is a surreal environment that we're in, and it is also a time that feels as if all of the rules of the game are crumbling before us, and it is up to us to really rewrite the new rules of the game. I was on a webinar last week and someone said that sooner or later we will be in a post-COVID world, and the real choice before us is what are we willing to leave behind in the old world, and what are we willing to pull and bring into the new world. And I feel like while we see the rules of oppression and violence and aggression and incarceration, while those rules are starting to crumble before our eyes, I'm reminded from Vajra and Kalia that we will also be creating the new rules for the new world that we're in. And so I'm both hopeful and I'm troubled. So I'm gonna do my best to stay focused, but please know that one day we will be out of this and we will be in a post-COVID world, but it doesn't mean we're in a non-racist world. So couple things that I want to do today is first provide a little bit of context, right? Like, where are we as a society, and why do we need to heal? And what does racial reconciliation and racial healing mean in a white supremacist society that is buttressed and supported by Negrophobic attitudes, beliefs, and values? The second thing I want to do is talk about the ways in which this environment that we're in is incredibly toxic for our well-being, and it's toxic for those adults who work with young people, and the danger of this sort of racial toxicity on our ability to transform the very society that creates the toxicity in the first place. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about healing itself, and then how we actually embrace and lean into a healing-centered world and a healing-centered strategy, both for our schools and for our classrooms. And so I tend to go over, but I will not go over today. So I'm gonna just kind of jump in and get started. So the question then is, why healing, right? Why do we need to heal in the first place? And we are familiar and understand that the laws and the policies of our society have not benefited all of us. But I want to take it a step further. I want to talk a little bit about what I believe are really two viruses that are in America right now. And one of the viruses, obviously, we recognize is COVID-19, which has sort of pulled the blanket off of America and sort of revealed the naked shame of racial inequality and racial suffering. That's that first virus. And that virus, we know, is trying to live, but it unfortunately lives in the respiratory system of our society. And in doing so, it has shown us that the disinvestments in our neighborhoods, the disinvestments in our schools, the disinvestments in jobs and opportunities, that virus then has taken hold and has grossly disproportionate numbers of deaths in Black and brown communities. But we also have a second virus that I want to point out, call out, and name. And that second virus is Negrophobia, supported by anti-Blackness. And I use the term Negrophobia, borrowing from Frantz Fanon, really to call out and highlight the ways in which the fear and hatred of Blackness is supported and interwoven into the very laws and policies and values of a society. How else can you watch people suffer from ongoing racialized trauma and not call it Negrophobia? And these are the real viruses we need to heal from. And that if we don't call out the virus, if we don't call out the real thing that it is, how are we expected to heal from it? It would be like trying to heal from cancer and calling it a cold. And so when I call it Negrophobia, supported by anti-Blackness, then it calls into question for those of us who teach, it calls into question for those of us who are white, or for those of you who are white, what do I do about it? It is not enough to understand it intellectually. It is not enough to only just read books about it. It calls into question a moral ethic about your role as a teacher, your moral ethic as a role as an educator, about how are you and what are you doing to transform this racialized trauma, to end this sort of deeply embedded Negrophobia and anti-Blackness in ways that create a new society. These are two viruses that have had a devastating impact on our communities. And that if we don't think about how our schools and our role as educators can confront and transform them, then in some ways we end up reproducing them. And so our challenge is twofold. We have to fight for justice. At the same time, we have to pursue the highest parts of our humanity. that we can't do one or the other, y'all. We can't simply and only fight and resist. While that is necessary, we also have to see the humanity in all of us. And that is the justice struggle that we have to navigate and embrace. That if we only fight and resist, what we become is sort of frenzied activists. But if we only hope, dream, and embrace humanity, we become sort of milquetoast, disconnected pacifist. So we, those of us who call ourselves educators, have to hold both of these conditions, both of these tensions as we teach for justice, as we fight for justice, and as we try to transform this place that we call America. So what is this context then? The context that these two viruses have created, right? COVID is just a new virus, but the underlying issues have been there. And ongoing Negrophobic anti-Blackness have created an environment that some people have called post-traumatic stress disorder, that they had exposure to what we've experienced with George Floyd. We sometimes misdiagnose it as post-traumatic stress disorder. It's a term that was designated and came out of soldiers that were coming from war. And we know and understand that this environment that we live in, that post-traumatic stress disorder, is inappropriate, ill-equipped, and misdiagnose the very issues that show up in our classrooms and in our schools. So in a more appropriate term, and I want to encourage people to use this term as opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is persistent traumatic stress environment. And when we use persistent traumatic stress environment, the first thing we call out is the trauma that we experience is not post. There's nothing post about it. And my fear is that 6 to 8 weeks or 5 weeks from now, we might be having the same conversation about another beautiful Black man's life, right? So there's nothing post about the ongoing assault on communities of color. So we have to name it. So it's persistent. And then it's not a disorder. To call it a disorder presumes that what is wrong sits with the individual. But we know that it is not the individual that is disrupted, but the environment in which the individual lives and the communities live. So when we use the term persistent traumatic stress environment, it gives us a context for understanding what shows up in our schools and in the environment that we work in. Now, all of this environment is toxic to our well-being, right? That if you look at this slide, if you think of your classroom or where you live, that if you lived in a toxic environment, that if you lived in this, that you would be breathing in these toxins, and over time that those toxins can make you ill or sick, and eventually they could become lethal. But James Gabarino, in his research on social toxicity, says that social toxins are just like physical toxins, and physical toxins are like asbestos and lead paint. And that when you breathe asbestos and lead paint in, over time, it can make you sick. Well, he says that there are social equivalents to physical toxins. And those social equivalents are things like fear, anxiety, uncertainty, shame, stress. All of those social toxins are produced by this environment that's persistent stress. And that we have to find ways to transform the ecosystem of toxicity so that we create an ecosystem of well-being. And that's what we call healing, which I'll talk about in a second. And the role of educators, in particular, as teachers and educational leaders, is to understand the ways in which the persistent stress environment creates social toxic conditions for our young people and for the adults who support young people. And here's a way that we can begin to think about social toxicity This is a model that we use to kind of describe the ways in which social toxicity has an impact on young people in our communities. This is Mia, and Mia works in a school, and she works in a socially toxic environment. And social toxicity are like rain clouds that are shaped by homophobia and racism and white supremacy and othering and colorism and poverty, that all of these issues that shape American life are toxic to the well-being of Mia and her work. And they rain down on Mia, and they, unlike regular rain clouds that sort of stay on the outside, they actually get inside. And what happens is Mia, it has an impact on Mia at the individual level, but it also has an impact on Mia's relationships with those who she works with at the interpersonal level. And it also has an impact on Mia where she works at her school or her institution. And that impact at the institution influences the values, the practices, and the policies of that institution. So much so that the institution itself that is exposed to social toxicity produces its own form of toxicity, and it reproduces itself. So this is the ecosystem of toxicity, of persistent inequality and persistent stress that we work in, which means that we can't address only one part of this ecosystem. We can't just focus on changing the policy, values, and practices. We can't just change Mia at the individual level or the relationships. We have to change all three levels to be anti-racist, to be places of belonging, so that we begin to transform this social toxicity into places where people and institutions and individuals can heal. So what is healing anyway? When we talk about healing, like, what does it mean to actually heal? And so I want to offer a definition that I think is important in our discussion of healing. And so when I talk about healing, and in my writing, I talk about healing as an ongoing process of restoration of our collective well-being. It is a continuous, culturally based practice that promotes human flourishing among individuals, relationships, and institutions. So healing is a process, not an end result. And it is ongoing, and it is collective. Two key distinctions when I talk about healing. One is that we can't think of healing as the end result of something. That's called well-being. Healing is the pathway to well-being. Healing is what we do to achieve well-being, and it never ends. We always are engaged in healing so that we can always sustain and maintain our well-being. And second, it is a collective process. This means that we can't think of healing as only an impacting on the individual, but it has to have an impact at the collective level. My friend here in Oakland, he says, if I'm sick, we sick. Or if I'm well, we well. And so this idea, I think, is important when we talk about healing, is that it shifts from thinking about healing in its purely clinical sense that presumes that you can heal, that you heal an individual, and that's fine. But this is a collective sense, meaning that our well-being is tied to one another. And so when we talk about healing in this way, we think about healing as a collective process. And we call that healing-centered engagement, which is a specific process that we use in institutions where we find young people of color. We use this process of healing-centered engagement to transform the institutions, the people in those institutions, to all focus on the well-being of people in the institution. So when I talk about healing-centered engagement, essentially what it is the process that aligns the institution with a perspective, an approach, and a strategy that addresses the harm and restores well-being. Many of our institutions that support young people of color are systems that are defined by harm, discipline, and punishment and confinement. And so healing-centered engagement says that we have to shift from harm, discipline, and punishment and confinement and create the opportunities and supports for restoration, hope, and healing. It means that we have to really think about our relationships. We have to think about the practices in those organizations and institutions in ways that sustain hope and healing. So we have a few principles that I think are important in thinking about Healing Centered, and I want to talk about those quickly because I know there's a lot of questions and answers that I want to get to. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I want to mention these principles, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk about them in more detail as we get to our panel discussion. And so first is important is that when we talk about healing, healing happens at these three levels, at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, and at the institutional level. We know that you cannot transform an institution if the people in that institution are still sick. Or you can't transform a police department or a school if the people in that institution or the police department or the school still have Negrophobia or anti-Blackness. You can't transform, you can't just change the laws and policies. The laws and policies are necessary prerequisites, but they never constitute the transformation because we have to actually transform the values that people hold, the relationships that they hold, and then the policies that actually support that. All three need to be transformed. We use these 5 principles in talking about healing-centered engagement, each of which you're familiar with in different forms of research, which I'm not going to get into. But culture, when we talk about culture and identity, we know that many ways in which we're harmed to society is a function of our identity and culture. But we also know that the cure and well-being lies in our cultural values and beliefs. So culture means that there's a cure when we saturate our lives with our cultural identity, and that culture is represented and celebrated and supported and advanced in these institutions. The second is agency. The research suggests that when people, what we see right now in the streets, what we see right now across America, that agency, the ability to speak truth to power, actually contributes to a sense of well-being, both individually and collectively, because when you have agency, you have the idea and the perception that you can control uncontrollable forces in society. The third is relationships. And when we transform relationships from transactional relationships to transformative relationships, and transformative relationships are built through vulnerability, they're built through honesty and conversation, they're built based on our human connection. And then when we build the environments where people can actually foster transformative relationships, we create an opportunity for different kinds of healing opportunities. The fourth is meaning. And that is, we have to remind ourselves that none of us are simply in this occupation just to get a paycheck, right? That this calling that we have reminds us that we make meaning, that the work that we do actually has greater currency beyond what we do on a daily basis, that we're laying a foundation for a society that we want to create. But we have to remind ourselves with meaning making, that we practice making meaning of our work every day. And the last is perhaps not the most important, but certainly significant, is our aspirations. And the aspirations means is that we have to work every day to see the end result, that we have to cultivate the ability to have the end result in the society that we want to create. And these 5 principles, culture, agency, relationships, meaning, aspirations, they spell karma, and that we could create schools, we could create curriculum in our classrooms to revolve around these 3 principles, these 5 principles as ways to support a healing process. So how do we actually do it, and what does it look like? What are the sort of steps to engage in a healing-centered process? And so this is a quick way to describe how we may think of some steps toward a healing-centered process. So this is a pyramid, and this pyramid is sort of divided at the individual, interpersonal, and at the institutional level. And it means that when we talk about transforming the ecosystem of healing and harm, that we have to do it at 3 levels. Now, it doesn't mean that that when you move up the pyramid that that the institution may not change. It doesn't mean that when you start at the bottom that it is only required for the individual to make the transformation. What it means is that the people in institutions, as well as the people fighting to change them, have a healing process. But it also means that we have interpersonal relationships that need healing. That is our teams and how we work with one another, how we care for one another, how we show up for one another. And it also means that the policies and the practices of the institution ultimately need to change as well. So what you see on the right side is individual healing practices, because we need y'all. We need to stay in this work. So we need individual healing practices so that we stay well. We establish cohorts of practitioners, so a small group of people. Farima will talk about this because she's, and Christina Villarreal will talk about this, creating cohorts of people who are committed to healing at your institution, and then using those cohorts to build profound interpersonal relationships built on vulnerability and honesty and our human connection. And then we begin to review and engage young people and those that are most affected by those policies in interrogating those policies themselves by calling out the kind of policies that actually create harm, and then change those policies and evaluate their impact on our healing environment. So those are some steps that I think are important in thinking about our healing-centered practice. And so right now, I just want to end with this image, which is for so long in our work with young people, in my research and work with young people in Oakland and at Camp Akili here in Oakland, we embrace young people, but not recognizing that actually an embrace releases oxytocin, which is a chemical that produces connection. And that when we embrace each other, and that when we spend time with each other, and when we actually can see each other, that we create these bonds of human connection that cannot be severed. And I think now more than ever, that we need to figure out how to make allow for our institutions to be more humane, to be more caring, to be more kind, so that we can actually have more transformative healing for our young people. So I'm gonna pause there, and I know that there's a lot of questions and comments, and I'm looking forward to a conversation with Christina and Farima. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ginwright. That was right on time. And we are very excited to now have two scholars joining you to continue this conversation. So I'm just going to quickly introduce these two women who I am so fortunate to be able to call two of my closest friends. They are both scholars, organizers, professors, teacher educators. First, I'll introduce Dr. Farima Khurshid, who is a proud Bay Area educator, organizer, scholar. She has over a decade of experience teaching at the elementary level, as well as teaching, supervising, and supporting educators locally, nationally, and internationally. She's currently an assistant professor and teaching supervisor at the University of San Francisco in California, and she holds leadership roles in countless organizations. But to name a few: Teachers for Social Justice, People's Education Movement in the Bay, the National Education for Liberation Network, and the Radical Healing Leadership Team at Flourish Agenda. She will also be joined by Dr. V, Christina Villarreal, who is proudly born and raised in the Bay Area. You can see we are definitely repping the Bay here in New Jersey today. V has spent nearly a decade teaching and learning with beautiful youth of East Oakland, California, where she taught middle school social studies and then served as an assistant principal. Currently, she serves as the faculty director of the teacher education program at Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she also teaches courses in ethnic studies and healing-centered engagement. And like Farima, she also serves as a radical healing trainer with Flourish Agenda. We're actually really excited that later on this week, The two of them will be working with our students in the Newark Teacher Project, leading one of the radical healing retreats that Flourish Agenda offers. So with that, I thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the three of you talking about the impact of healing-centered work and how you are really innovating and applying it to education in ways that are so important for young people across the country. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It has been beautiful so far, y'all. I just want to say one of the things that I'm so grateful for in this work is that it is so relational in terms of the transformative ways that we engage with one another. It's not just a thing that we do at work. It's something that we live out in the relationships that we have with one another. So I can think of countless times that Sean, Christina, or V as we call her, have had these conversations together and have had them with love and have challenged each other on concepts and have pushed each other, have affirmed each other, have cried with each other. And so I want to name that so much of this journey is not how, you know, what Sean was saying earlier, it's not just intellectual work, right? This is lived in everything that we do and we breathe. As you see, my niece is literally sitting right next to me. My niece has come with me, you know, to different events because this is something that we bring to our families, right? We bring in our relationships with our friendships who are not in these spaces, right? We bring all of this learning and this healing-centered engagement in all of the spaces we occupy and in everything that we do. And so I just want to start off by saying that I feel so grateful to heal alongside of you. So I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. Thank you to everybody who is here. I did a quick scroll through participants, so I see a lot of my students in the building, and I love you and I miss you. And yes, I miss hugging each of you. And I definitely want to echo what Farima is saying, that the work that we're talking about here and the types of frameworks, healing-centered engagement, these are programs. They're not curriculum that you can just implement in your schools. These aren't just cognitive tasks, like they're ways of life for each and every one of us. And so we're not here to give you these like perfect strategies, which oftentimes can happen in the ways that are our very ways of being, right? Kalia's poem, ancestral knowledge, is so often co-opted. And so listen for how it's being co-opted in the places where you work and also where you hang out, which these days is mostly in these spaces. So I want us to, I hope we can get into that and how we can begin to engage in transformative relationships, given both our limitations and the possibilities of the spaces that we're in. So thanks for having us today.
So I'm wondering if it would be good for us to just kind of lift up some of the things that Sean was saying in his talk and maybe just unpack them a little bit. And I'm thinking particularly unpacking it with our roles as educators in this moment, right? And specifically in our role as we continue to navigate COVID-19, as we continue to think about what school is going to mean when we come back. And if it's okay, can I put you on blast for a second? Okay, I'm just gonna put my niece on blast. And also my nephew, and also many of the young people that are in my life, and just thinking about what matters to them right now, right? What matters. And so many of us are preparing for what our curriculum is gonna look like, how we're gonna be supporting our students, what is the bell schedule gonna be like, all of the very structural, kind of logistical, very transactional ways of thinking about teaching, right? Which is something that Sean talks about when he talks about moving from transactional to transformative. Transactional meaning that my job and my duty as an educator is going to rely on my, practices, theories, skill sets, right? And really thinking about, well, what is math gonna look like? And how am I gonna teach it on this platform? And what is it gonna look like online, right? How do we kind of move past that and really think about the humanity of our young people and what they're experiencing? And the reality is, as educators, many of us have different experiences with what that looks like, depending on the zip codes that you either live in or that you teach in, right? And so for some young people, I'm sure online distance learning is nothing but a thing. And I'm sure it will roll out effortlessly for some young people. For other young people, they are dealing with homelessness. They are dealing with domestic violence. They are dealing with issues related to deportation, fears of police brutality. And so as we think about the context that our young people are living in, even those who are privileged, they need to understand why they need to heal too. That virus that Sean was talking about, right? That virus does not discriminate based on age, right? If we look at the research, we know that young people, as early as their earliest childhood experiences, I'm talking preschool, I'm talking even before then, already start to internalize racist ideas, already start to have preferential desires to kind of relate to whiteness as opposed to brown or blackness, right? And so what does that mean for us as educators? I've had some conversations with some folks who say, well, I don't want to take the innocence away from young people. I don't want to scare them. But who are we talking about when we make these statements, when we know that there are preschoolers that are being placed in handcuffs, right? We know that young people are already dealing with different forms of violence, but perhaps don't have the space and the ability to name their experiences because of the kind of desire to center, the apolitical curriculum or just content-based instruction without actually asking them, how are they doing? What are they feeling? What are they understanding in this moment? How do they understand what's happening in the streets right now? How are we taking time to really unpack how that's showing up for our youngest of learners and also at any age, including teacher education? Right? How are we centering the humanity of the folks that we are responsible to educating and to supporting in their educational process in this moment? And I think that is a really pertinent question that all of us need to ask ourselves. How do you make room for healing-centered engagement? What does that look like? Can you name the routines that you kind of integrate into your instruction? Can you actually name the instructional minutes in the same ways that you do for English language arts and math? Can you actually tell me what the instructional minutes are that you allocate healing-centered practices, how to deregulate, how to de-escalate, situations, how to regulate our bodies when we're feeling triggered? How do we kind of provide tools for resourcing ourselves when we are feeling triggered, when we are in need of that regulation? What does that look like in our practice? And what does that look like in our personal lives? Like, what is our self-awareness around how we're experiencing the moment? Do we journal? Do we have spaces where we're able to kind of process? And so I want to stop there because I think that's a lot of questions that I'm throwing at folks, but I hope that that is a beginning place to really think about the space that we create for ourselves, for our young people, and for those around us to even begin this process.
Thank you, Farima. I'm always inspired. I'm a one.
Thanks, Farima.
Let all of her questions wash over you and sink in, because those are crucial and critical questions for every single educator. I'd say every single human being to be thinking about right now, especially those of us that deeply love and care and are so deeply worried about young people right now. That definitely makes me think about, because we're talking about teacher education, how this connects. And in our early conversations about preparing for this panel, I've been talking about how I think about language and the importance of the language that we're using. So even if I take today as an example, let's take Kalia's poem. Think about how intentional she was with the words that she's been emboldened and empowered by. Those words that are very healing for us to hear. I saw somebody drop into the Q&A that when these words move us to tears, but for some people, right, words are triggering. And so as teachers, we have to be really, really intentional and really clear about the language, especially if we're on these online platforms. Riot, rebellion, uprising, being really clear, because the words that we choose, white supremacy or prejudice, being really clear that the language we choose sends messages to young people about their humanity. And so in terms of how you frame your objectives, right? Farima was asking us to think about the minutes that we allocate in classrooms. Think about the language that is going in, that is informing that curriculum, and recognize it as deeply interwoven with your biography. It is deeply tied. All my students that are on this, I'm calling it a call, but this webinar, you've heard me say that 1,000 times. that every single pedagogical and curriculum move we make is deeply, deeply tied to our biographies. And so when you think about that pyramid and you think about that healing process, that individual healing process, you yourself have to stop and think about what words are triggering and exciting for you, what images. So when you think about the words, the language, the images that you put in front of students in this upcoming moment, recognize where that's coming from and your own relationship to that. Because I can't think of a more important time for us to renew our vows to justice. And I'll have to give a plug for tomorrow in terms of thinking about, well, what does that look like? There's an incredible webinar tomorrow on repurposing our pedagogies in the ways that Cornel West talks about justice is what love looks like in public, healing-centered pedagogies, ethnic studies, abolitionist teaching. That's what love looks like in classrooms. And that's the kind of love that young people need right now. And that's not a fluffy, shallow love. To be able to enact that kind of love is going to require a painful healing process, a painful recognition and reconciliation with how your histories are intertwined with the histories of your students. And that's the work. When you think about that karma framework that Dr. G just introduced, when we talk about culture, that's part of it. That no history and no self, that's part of that healing work. And it's not designed, it's not supposed to be pretty. And so that's what comes up for me immediately as we kick off this conversation.
Yeah, I think too, Dr. G and Dr. V, Dr. G and Dr. V, when you said that this work is painful, I think that's so critical. I remember a moment in Camp Akili when Kalia was going through one of the activities and we had to experience a gender walk. And what happened in that walk was that young men had to experience what it was like for young women to be sexualized, to be disrespected, right? To really feel how that lands on people that they had been building relationships during this camp with, right? And there were so many tears. I mean, I cried. It was an intergenerational healing space. We had camp counselors crying, young people crying. There was a moment where my niece came up to me and she hugged me so tight. I'm getting emotional even talking about it. But there was a moment where we all had to just release all of that pain that many young people and adults alike have learned to internalize and not name. Because of the way our society has silenced us and the ways in which we fear naming pain. And it's a very visceral experience, right? It's you feel it in the body. And so when Sean was talking about, these different individual levels, it looks all cute and packaged up in that pyramid or in those cycles, but the reality is it's very complex and rigorous work. We talk about content and rigor in the classroom, but emotional intelligence and connection and emotional literacy is rigorous as hell. And yet we don't do enough of that. And I'm not talking about socio-emotional learning because I do feel, aligned with the ways that Dr. Bettina Loves talks about how like socio-emotional learning can really also be aligned with anti-Blackness, right? Young people know what to do. They need spaces to do it. They need safety to do it, right? And so when I think about the individual healing work, like I said, it's visceral, it's in the body. I think about Resmaa Menakem's work. We were talking about this yesterday, right? We talked about how, you can intellectualize as much as you want. You can strategize as much as you want. But this is something that has been passed down from generation to generation and it lives in the body until we acknowledge it. Is that dirty pain versus clean pain. The dirty pain is when we don't want to talk about race. We don't want to talk about pain. We want to avoid it. And then that's when we keep recreating the same cycles because it won't end until we actually acknowledge the harm. And that is a form of reparations. We can't just talk about healing without talking about reparations. We can't talk about reparations and repairing harm if we're not clear on what Dr. G was saying. Is it a cancer or is it a cold? We need to be really clear. And so that means there's a lot of internal work that we have to do in order to get to that place. And so what is your internal work? What does that look like for you? Maybe you haven't started. Some of us have started. For some folks, it looks like therapy. For other folks, it looks like healing squads. I mean, I can think about how many conversations we've had where we had to hold each other accountable with love. But why? Because we've committed to holding each other accountable with love. In fact, we have promised one another as friends and comrades, sis, if I'm doing anything problematic that you feel is causing harm, whether it's to you or anybody else, please, I give you the permission, hold me accountable with love, help me be better. Do we have those kinds of relationships with the people that we work with? I'm not sure. Have we built that type of trust with the people that we're working with as we serve young people? I'm not sure. Are we doing that with our students? Do our students feel safe to call us in when we're committing harm? I'm not sure, right? And so those are the things that we have to think about as relational, as really integral to enacting this work.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something real quick? For all of you who are, teachers, and I'd like, Christina and Farima, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this. Folks are going like, well, what would I do, and how do I do it, and what is my work, and what is my practice? And I began by saying that that healing-centered work is, like, as you said, is not handing somebody a curriculum. And so here might be a way for you to start your healing-centered work. And the question is if you didn't feel anything when you saw what happened to George Floyd, if you didn't feel anything, you probably won't be a healing-centered educator. If you saw it and then turned the channel and went on about your day, wondering about what curriculum you'll use, you probably may not be a good healing-centered educator. But I don't suspect that that was the case. I suspect that something happened in your heart, you felt something, whether it was rage, whether it was anger, whether it was sadness, whether it was whatever, you felt something. That is your starting point for healing-centered engagement. It starts with something deeper than what you feel up here. That is where you start your healing-centered work. How did you feel? Right? Sometimes we want to move to action before we even identify how we damn felt about something. We want to move into action. Stop, just pause. How do I feel about this, right? Because it is how we feel, and telling and sharing that story and leaning into that story gives us the courage to create that condition in our classroom. When we do that at Camp Akili, it's the courage to create the space so that we can be safe together. So your first assignment is, well, how did you feel about that? Let's lean into that. And then, one of the things I've been saying, point 2 is, and I'd like to get your thoughts about this, V and Farima, is for those of you who are principals and curriculum directors and teachers in classrooms, if you open up and bring back, if some of your districts will probably stay online, but some of y'all are going to come back into the classroom. But even if you don't, even if you're still doing class by Zoom, if you don't create a week where you're focused on healing kinds of work, you're actually reproducing harm. 1 week, because you have something to say about where we are as a society and how you're feeling as a teacher right now. Those young people have gone through something, they have something to say, the parents, so it's important. And I just kind of, I don't know if I'm supposed to pose questions, but I guess I can ask a question too, V and Christina, Farima. How would you do that? What was that look? What might that look like in your own work with your students, Farima, and with your teachers, Christina?
Well, my students also know this, that I'm very clear on, I can't teach you until I know you. And I can't work with you until you know me. And so what we talk about, right, in the work that we do with Flourish, but also I know that Farima and I talk about this a lot, is how we also show up and being honest, which is why where we were, how Bree opened today by saying what this was a week ago is no longer what it is, and being open to that and not staying. So I'm saying, renew your vow to justice. Don't renew your vow to an institution. Don't renew your vow to a curriculum or to a strategy. Renew your vow to justice. And if you allow that to guide you, then the emotions that come up for you in moments like these will be that compass that will help you to make those curricular and pedagogical decisions in service of the humanity of yourself and your students. What that looks like, an easy answer, which doesn't mean, which isn't easy to enact, is radical vulnerability. And that's something that I think a lot of, not just teachers, but I think many humans struggle with, especially in a white supremacist patriarchal society, right? That does not allow or sanction like our vulnerability. And in one of those, in the sacred spaces that classrooms can be, in the kind of sacred ecosystems that we have, that we know exist, a lot of those teachers are right here on this call. What that is going to require is us allowing, right, our full humanity to show up and to center our stories. Farima does a beautiful job of framing just how importantly and how much our stories matter in spaces, and starting there and centering that, it humanizes the experience and what it actually means to meet people where you are. Doesn't mean that you have those same experiences, and you need to be willing, like when you're saying, Dr. G, that we got to ask how we feel. That's another first step that I do with my students, is being really clear emotionally. Like when you think about your earliest race related memories, your experiences with racism, either as a perpetrator or as a victim of racism, how did you feel in that moment? And how do those emotions catalyze the actions you take? Because those are trauma responses. If you fight, you flee, if you freeze in those moments, and that happens in classrooms. When young people ask us the critical questions, how you react in that moment can be either a deeply selfish or selfless act based on your emotions. And so we do a lot of that deep emotional work of recognizing and seeing sometimes those moments of profound fear and of shame. How do we translate those into moments of possibility to lean in and possibly fuck up? And it isn't because you're going to make mistakes. The difference is how then will you commit to rising, being better, repairing harms. All of those different pieces are conversations that I try to have with my students, who are mostly, right, teachers in training or former teachers that are coming back to think about how they want to go into policy or be school leaders. And these deeply fundamental questions about how we interact with each other based on how we interact with ourselves is a necessary first step. A lot of people come with questions like, well, give us the tools and give us the strategies. Start with yourselves and the answers to those questions. How are you reacting to what you see on the news? Which words are triggering you? Which words are bothering you? If you felt one way after what happened to George Floyd, and if that tune changed when you started worrying about property over human lives, that's an indicator of your proximity or distance to what's happening. And you need to have those conversations, and you need to do that work if you're committed to healing, ourselves and our institutions.
Yeah, when I think about what that looks like for young people, like any of my kindergartners from any of the years that I've ever taught will always remember our daily ritual, which was the first moment you walk into my classroom, we are in circle. We have a process, and that ritual is they have a little hummingbird that represents my brother, right? And I talk to them about how much my brother changed my life, even in his life and in his absence, right? And I share parts of myself with that. And so when I feel scared to share, I hold on to that to remind myself that it's so important to speak my truth. I model what that looks like for young people to speak their truth. And so the ritual is always the same, and the prompt is always the same. How do you feel and why? It starts off probably very superficial in the beginning. I feel happy because I got a toy. And then before you know it, I feel sad because my father was taken away, right? And so how do you hold space for young people to name what they're experiencing without taking up all the space and wanting to teach or comfort, or just let them be, and then also give them tools to write that shit out, right? Even before they knew how to write words, my babies were scribbling in their journals about how they felt, but they could tell me what each scribble meant. They could read them scribbles to me, and that is what mattered, right? And so that's how I think about with our most youngest of learners, as just one example, right? But then when I think about what is the work I have to do in order for me to show up for my young people, I had to create spaces for myself, y'all. I didn't have them at my school. I didn't feel safe to have these conversations in the way that I needed to for my own humanity. And so I created space. And so one of the spaces I created is called HELA. It stands for Healing, Empowerment, Love, Liberation, and Action. And it was within the Teachers for Social Justice space, where we simply put out like who are educators of color, and it was a racial affinity space, who want to engage in healing. And I want to name racial affinity spaces matter, y'all. because all of us experience harm differently. And sometimes you need to have your own space where you can speak your truth in ways that allow you to be vulnerable, because you can't always feel safe being vulnerable for very real reasons. There are hierarchies in our school. There are repercussions for sharing in certain ways, right? Whenever there's power involved. And so if you can't do that at your school, in order for us to be in our full humanity, we have to be able to be vulnerable too. Otherwise, we're going to be out here harming folks. So how do you create the space with other folks who want to do that work? Sometimes we don't have to always fight people to heal. If y'all don't want to heal, that's on you. I hope that I can continue to model through my everyday actions why it's important. But until then, I'm going to focus my time and energy on folks who want to do this work. And what we're going to do is we're not simply just only going to share our stories, although that's really important. We're also going to read, because we have to understand some shit, right? There are lenses that we need to have access to. As a non-Black person of color, I need to understand anti-Blackness within my own community. And it's my work to heal that within my own community, within my own home, right? It should not fall on the backs of Black folks to deal with that at school sites. So how am I creating the space for other non-Black people of color to really have these difficult conversations, right? That's just one example. There are many examples when I think about teacher education. How do we understand that as future educators? Yes, it's important for you to know the standards. Yes, it's important for you to pass all these. Actually, it's not important for you to pass all these damn tests. Let me just name that right now. But for me, it's important for my students to have a lens with which to understand the tools that are being mechanized in school spaces to harm young people, and to be critical of them, and to have the courage to disrupt them, to have a courage not only to disrupt, but to engage in that aspiration that Sean was talking about, to think about, okay, well, if we don't want this, then what do we want? What will it look like? If we're going to replace something, take something out, push someone, to get to a certain place, what does that look like? And I think that is really important work. And it can be done in many ways. It can be done in vision boards, even digitally. When we went online, one of the first things I asked my students was, how can we continue to connect even on this platform, but in a way that allows for us to still really connect? And so having these regular check-ins, also coupling with, what do you hope for? What is it that you see possible with the skill sets that you have, with the capacity that you have? Because all of us can do something. Maybe not all of us can be on the streets. Maybe not all of us can do what me or V or Dr. G are doing, but you can do something. And so based on your capacity and your proximity to privilege, right, what can you do? And let's focus on that, right? So yeah, that's awesome.
And Farima, one of the things is, folks that are listening, they're kind of at, what is the PD that we should do at our school? Or what is the PD? This is not a PD, right? So let's don't call it a PD. Professional development makes you better in your profession. What we're talking about is your personal transformation. And that's a different thing. If we focus on your personal transformation, we're going to get a better professional. But if we focus on your professional development, doesn't mean we're going to get a better person. So 3 things you could do in your next staff meeting, just basic things. First, in your staff meeting, sit in a circle. If you can, sit in a circle without desk. Just try it. Sit in a circle without desk. 2, first question is, what's going on in your life? Just ask that question. Have people talk about what's going on in your life. Not your classroom, but your life. 2, how you feel about that, right? Talk about and then 3rd, what are your aspirations for this year? What do you hope for? These 3 basic questions. That changes the staff meeting. It changes the relationships, and it begins to create safety. It doesn't create safety automatically. But when you begin to do things and ask questions about people's lives as opposed to people's professions, you begin to create the boundaries that allow for people to be safe. So what do y'all teachers think about that?
I do think it's important. I think how we even think about our spaces is important. And again, to not be bound, what Farima, the note that she ended on, because I know we're going to move into some Q&A from our participants soon, is be really clear on, again, what is it that you are being loyal to? Who are you being loyal to? Where does your loyalty lie? And ask that of your own biographies. My students know that we do activities where we even examine our own educational biographies, our racial biographies, looking at the teachers that we had in the same ways that we might recreate parenting styles as we raise children. We're going to recreate pedagogical styles that could be deeply violent that we thought were good. And if it did work for you, how are you sure that it works for the young people in your classroom? And part of that is having those hard and difficult conversations. And again, going back to like the point I started, is being really clear on your language, because that language can be a misdiagnosis when if you try to equate healing-centered engagement with social emotional learning, you're already creating a problem. It's a misdiagnosis and it's a misappropriation. And that's something that we've seen happen far too many times in educational spaces. And so I think being, again, really just be aware of that's something you can do today. Being aware of like the language, the words that you use and what those words mean. What does it feel for you? Because for me to see or to know that what I am seeing are uprisings, are rebellions, that's where there's a political clarity in that that wasn't mine alone, that comes from generations, right? That, again, that ancestral knowledge, to kick it back to Kalia. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna stop there because I'm looking at our time, and I think we need to check in with.
I think we have 2 minutes to transition. So I just want to add, it's funny that both of you talked about that, because I regularly check in with this one about like, how is school? How is, what do you love about the teachers that you love? What do you not love, right? And what is always the answer is she loves the teachers that create circle spaces in their classrooms and that center student voice, right? We have to center student voice. You can create the most beautiful curriculum that you think will change whoever's life, right? But if it's not informed by what young people want and need, then you're just stroking your own ego, right? And then you wonder why young people don't respond, right? And so that's one piece. I think the other piece is, it's recently one of the homies, Akia Gross, if you haven't checked their page out, they have the Woke Kindergarten page on Facebook. And let me tell you, I mean, Akia is so powerful. And they created this curriculum and I shared it. And the next morning I had like 60 something comments from, because my post was public, from mostly white women teachers who had a huge problem with the curriculum or with that particular piece, and saying that it was, we're indoctrinating young people to be racist against white people, to be cop killers, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's important to just name that the colleagues that you work with will not always be receptive to what you're doing. And that's okay. What I did that was best for me was I simply blocked the folks and deleted those comments and continued to speak to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as white co-conspirators who want to engage in this work. Because my priority is to share information that I think is vital to healing this nation. Whether someone agrees with it or not, I'm going to continue to share, because that's my responsibility as an educator, no matter what grade I teach in. And that is the kind of privilege that I have, to be able to share this information by having so many networks of social justice-based organizations and educators that are doing this. I'm going to use that privilege and I'm going to share it. And I'm going to make sure that there are resources for people to draw on, to work with other educators, to team up, to collaborate. You shouldn't be doing this work on your own. I mean, the reality is this work is collective. And so create those collectives where you can talk with one another and really strategize. I have dope white colleagues who want to do this work in ways that center justice. And so I'm like, cool, read this book, start there. Then come back, let's have a conversation about it. But until then, have this conversation with other white educators that you see attacking me. I don't want to have those conversations with them. Please, you have that. That's what solidarity, healing-centered solidarity looks like, is really strategizing on educating in those ways, right? So I'll stop there.
Hi, thank you so much. This is incredibly powerful, and it's Tanya and I are going through the Q&A, trying to figure out which questions we're going to lift up. And each time we decided on a question, the three of you pretty much answered it just organically. That's where your conversation went, and you started answering them. And looking at the Q&A, and we also have some questions coming in on Facebook. It's like a family reunion. It's just all the people from the collectives that you're talking about, Farima, and it's really, even though we can't see each other be together, it's powerful to feel each other's presence. And with that, I'm going to start a question. And I wanted to, before I start, I want to see if it's okay, because the question came in from our very beloved comrade, Carla Shalaby. And her question is actually for Kalia. So first I wanted to see if it's okay, Kalia, if we hear a question towards you, but then I'm going to ask everyone else to chime in on it as well, because you know, you can answer it from the perspective of educators and teacher educators. So the question is, and you started to get at it a little bit, Farima, but we want to hear it from Kalia as well, is that sometimes teachers don't think that curriculum is part of healing-centered engagement. And we're wondering, Kalia, what you think about what ethnic studies has to do with healing.
I was really not prepared for this, but I will say though that I feel like in my poem I said this, and I'll say it again. Ethnic studies is about identity, and in my own experience with schooling, I've never experienced ethnic studies. I've experienced it with my aunt, because I've had that privilege of having her in my family and talking to the people that she works with and is friends with that are doing social justice work. So that's how I like gained knowledge on ethnic studies. But when I think about ethnic studies and the power of it, like I wonder what would that look like if we had that in schools everywhere, like not just in certain districts 20 minutes away from me, you know, different states. Like what does that look like everywhere? Ethnic studies being a part of a school requirement everywhere. And I just think that it's just really powerful to know where you come from, because if you don't know where you come from, it's hard to navigate where you will go. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you. And then to Farima and V, as professors who teach ethnic studies, both in the formal classroom and then outside in our collectives, if you could talk a little bit about the connection between ethnic studies and the healing work that you do.
V, you want to go first?
That's such an emotional question. Because of the role that ethnic studies and the ways that it's healed and given shape, purpose, and meaning to every single thing that I do. The only classes where I saw myself and my ancestors reflected, but not just my history, right? My histories are like the histories of my classmates, my neighbors, my friends, and that it's in learning, like ethnic studies teaches us solidarity. Ethnic studies, like solidarity and like love, they're all verbs. And that's something that is so like essential, because healing is also, right? It's a verb, it is an action item. And so that's, I think, what differentiates ethnic studies from so many other approaches, right? Or ways of being in this work that so many of us find healing, because it does actually center, it is centered on love in the classrooms, like love of self, like love of our ancestors, and love of our humanity, and a fierce commitment. It's a political project committed to restoring and claiming our humanity through understanding how our pasts are so deeply interconnected, even when they're ugly, and empowers us to engage in the healing processes necessary, which might include some destruction of property when necessary. This is what we mean by any means necessary. And what that, so reading, right, works like Fanon, and what it actually means to enact that in Lakesh, to say, you know, you are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. What does it mean to actually embody that and live it, and not just read it or recite it at the beginning? What, like, those are the types of ways that I see ethnic studies as so deeply essential and connected to our collective healing.
Yeah, and when I think about its healing, I think about, again, I don't work with them on their technical stuff that they have to do with school. They know my stance on that. But we do ethnic studies homeschooling with her and her brother. And so we talk about things like toxic masculinity and its relationship to race, right? The complexity of it. We talk about things like internalized racism. We talk about things like colorism. And when we talk about these things, when I provide spaces for them to understand that, it heals their ability to restore their own identity from what they've been fed. Because there are people in our family, there are people in their friends groups, there are teachers that they have that spew out really harmful assimilationist and problematic things. And so because they have a lens for it, they're able to say, that's their stuff and that's not mine to keep. I don't need to adopt that as my identity. I don't need to be ashamed of who I am and where I come from, including in our own home. Like, we've had to have like really hard conversations. And I think part of the healing is having tools to know how to have these conversations and how not to, take on imposter syndrome, right? I will be damned if this girl goes off to college with imposter syndrome, because I'm still healing from that shit. And so me sharing my story with her and naming, like, this is what comes, and us crying together, that's ethnic studies, right? The other piece is like understanding boundaries. Boundaries are critical with ethnic studies, right? Because again, not everybody is going to want to have these conversations. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have them. How do you understand how to navigate these conversations in ways that still feed you, and know how to keep, giving the information to the people that they love, that we love, that are sometimes hard to crack, right? Because sometimes, they say it's easier to raise a child with these ideas. It's so much harder to, heal the adults around these things, right? But I think the intergenerational conversations based in ethnic studies is critical for young people if we want to think about a new healed reality, a new healed society, a new healed world, right? And that includes all of us. It shouldn't just be, like she said, what we had a conversation about it. It shouldn't just be an elective. Actually, we need folks that are in government to take ethnic studies now. When we say ethnic studies now, we mean now, all caps, now, right? All of us need to have that in order for this nation to heal.
Preschool, ethnic studies preschool now.
That's right. Yeah, and as someone who did not experience any version of ethnic studies until I was in college and even grad school, I completely resonate with that. And so we've been talking a lot about how schools are not places of healing, right? That do not offer ethnic studies, that do not offer spaces to be heard, for children to be heard. And so this is a question for Dr. Ginwright. So if schools are sites of toxicity, right? If we're saying that schools are sites of toxicity, why do we suggest more engagement with them as acts of healing?
Woo.
Well, because that's where our young people are being harmed. And the true transformation is, they're not neutral sites. They're not just neutral. If they were neutral, then the possibility of healing, maybe more debatable, but they're places that harm. And that's where our young people are. And so we have the ability to create the practices and the systems that inflict harm on our young people. So we also have the power to remake those. And we have the creativity and the right to remake those. And so while it might seem crazy or like ridiculous, but what we're really talking about is reimagining schools, right? We're reimagining what a quality school day looks like. We're reimagining relationships. We're reimagining curriculum. We're reimagining all that because it was reimagined for us. We can reimagine it for us as well. So that's why schools are the place to do it. And I don't think it's just schools. I think it's probation departments. I think it's YMCAs. I think it's social workers and social services. Anywhere our young people are, we have the right and the responsibility to create situations and structures that facilitate their well-being. That's our right? We can't sit aside and just hope things get better. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's the way that I see it.
Yeah, I think this idea that we have to go where the children are. Wherever they are, we have to go there and create spaces for healing is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And so we're going to go ahead and wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much. This was so powerful. I definitely made my own notes, and this is really what I needed for this particular moment. And I just really thank each and every one of you for all of your thoughts and ideas and all of the love that you're bringing to this space. Yes.
So we are thrilled to be able to close out this event, even though I don't know about everyone else, but I could keep having this conversation for another couple hours. But we are very lucky that we have Lauren Adams, who's going to close our event out for us tonight. Lauren is a singer, songwriter, musician, and producer from San Francisco. A self-taught musician since the age of 9, Lauren began to perfect her craft while attending and graduating from Hampton University with her BS in Music Engineering and Technology. She has 14 years experience teaching music and theater to elementary and middle school students in Virginia, Miami, and in her home state of California. She's now the music director at The Way in Berkeley, California, and is a proud member of the hip hop, jazz, and soul collective, Soul Development. And with that, we bring you Lauren Adams. Thank you.
All right, y'all, on this one, we're gonna breathe in as a collective, as a community, in rhythm and in synchronicity. You ready? I want y'all to feel this one. Here we go. Breathe with me like this. Come on. That's it. Give me another one. Come on. Together we do this. Listen to the story. You see these helicopters, think we thugs, we pimps, we robbers. But we are teachers, preachers, knowledge seekers, lawyers, doctors. They tell you lock your doors, your stores, and hide your sons and daughters. But we are here to bring the truth. With that they have a problem. And we running from helicopters. Helicopters, got us running from helicopters, all up in them helicopters, got us running from helicopters, helicopters, they got us running from helicopters, coppers, yeah! Helicopter, helicopter over our heads, I see them lights, they flashing blue and that red. They chase us down the street and they shooting us dead. Cause they don't understand that we are more than they said. More than they said, we are more than the fear that they carry. We are more than all of the black lives you buried. We are more than anything they could dream, which is probably the reason why these helicopters chasing me got us running from helicopters. But we're done running from helicopters, all up in them helicopters. No more running from helicopters, tired of running from helicopters. No more running, tired of running, no more running. We're done running from your helicopters. We're done running from your helicopters. Yes, we are. We're done running. We're done running. Yes, we are. No more running. Tired of running. Done running from your helicopters.
Can I I'm trying to put my video on if I can. We can let the helicopter breathe until you can see me. I just first and foremost thank you all for just having me be a part of just such a, I mean, this is radical what you all are doing. There we go. This is what you all are doing is actually more radical than you think. Healing, like I think someone said it earlier, V, you might have said it, but this is radical healing. That's really what it is. It's about taking this truth and this knowledge and this love that we have as a people, and using it to amplify the stories. Thank you, Kalia, for reminding us of that, of storytelling and why it is that we have to have ethnic studies, but also the going back to our roots as Black people. We are griots. Our tradition is passed down orally, so we are familiar with telling stories. And indigenous folk, I love how you all use art to tell your stories, right? Like that is just what we do, and it is our responsibility to continue to tell those stories so that they can create an invitation for healing. I had to start with Helicopter because, and forgive me that I didn't do it live, but that's a difficult song to do right now. I am, like many of us, very angry with just that our world is, but in particular, this land, these divided states of America, anger is in that. And when we wrote Helicopter, this was when Terrence Crutcher was killed from a helicopter view, based on their perception of who he was. Again, from a helicopter view, they had all of these preconceived ideas about who this man was before even assessing what his issue was. And all it was he had issues with his vehicle, and it killed him. And like they've done so many other Black men and women. And so thank you, Kalia, for reminding us to tell those stories. And Helicopter is one of those stories that we, as a collective soul development, I am just one member of a collective of 4 amazing educators and freedom fighters who are gifted in their talents, musical talents. So shout out to my family. I don't know if you can see us, but I brought them with me. Anytime I try to, we do things solo, but just know that when I do this work, I'm bringing them with me and their stories as well. So thank you all for having me to do this. The last song I am gonna do live. And this one brings in the healing piece. This one brings in the healing piece that you all have been talking about how we, no matter where you are in this time in history, and no matter what you have, it's enough. It's enough to get us to where we're trying to go, which is true freedom and liberation. And so I thank all of you educators, all of you doctors that are on this call, and those who are in this, just in this space today. I just want to say thank you. Do not lose heart. Do not be weary of well-doing. This is the work, and I feel like we are closer than we've ever been. So whatever you have to offer, whatever you have to give, be it your privilege, if that's something you need to give in this moment, give it. If it's your resources, if you're the donating type, do that. They gave you the 2 links to donate to, the 2 organizations you can donate to. And then thirdly, if you have any gifts or talents, if you're creative, if you're a writer, whatever it is that you do, use it for this movement, please. No gift is too small. No gift is too big. We are enough in this moment. You are enough. We are enough. And I want to encourage you all with this last song, and I call it Her Pain. It's a mashup between I don't know if you all are familiar with BJ the Chicago Kid and Kendrick Lamar. They have a song called His Pain, and I love that record. But I was reading your article, Dr. Jen Wright, and the one that you did for the San Francisco Chronicle. Shout out to the city, Black San Francisco's in the house. But I wanna thank you. There's a word that you use that was familiar to me growing up as a Black child in the church. There was there's a lyric that was written by the late great Walter Hawkins, who is a Bay Area gospel legend. He's a legend, period. But in the Bay Area, we love and adore the music that he brought. But there was a song that he wrote called Thank You, Lord. But there is a line in it where he says, tragedies are commonplace. And you use the word commonplace. And when I tell you that struck a chord in my spirit, in my being, because I, as a Black queer woman, I've seen what can happen to us, to our people. And it is commonplace. This is an everyday thing. What we've witnessed with George Floyd, that is nothing. We all know there's nothing new under the sun. And for Black people, that is nothing new. It's again, just it's on video, on repeat, on repeat. And so we need to be repeating these truths, and we need to make it so that these things are not commonplace. We want them to be as taboo as possible, so left field that no one would even dream of committing such heinous and terroristic crimes. And so this song is just a way for us to activate, to access our healing, to access who we are, where we come from, and all that we are to push towards this true liberation. So I'll give you Her Pain. It says, tragedies are commonplace. There are all kinds of diseases. People are slipping away. The economy's down and people aren't getting enough pay. But as for me, all I can say is, I don't know why you keep blessing me. 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 I don't know why, I don't know why, I don't know why. I don't know why you keep blessing me. I don't know why you keep blessing me. I don't know why you keep blessing me. No idea why you keep blessing me. I don't know why, I don't know why. Cause it could have been me. It could have been Lauren right there outdoors. Could have been me with no food. Could have been me with no clothes. I could have been all alone without community or a friend. I could be just another number with a tragic end. Oh, but you didn't see fit for those things to be for me. So every day by your power, you just keep on and you keep on and you keep on blessing me. And I don't know why you keep blessing me. 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 I don't know why, I don't know why, I don't know why. No idea why you keep blessing me. I don't know why you keep on blessing me. But I'm grateful and I say, oh, 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 from the bottom of my heart, I'm grateful. Yes, I am. Oh, 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 wait a minute. Now I know why you keep blessing me. 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 Now I know why, now I know why, now I know why. Now I know why you keep blessing me. I know why you keep blessing me. I get it now and I know why you keep blessing me. I know why. So I can be a blessing to you, 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 and you, 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 and you, 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 and you, and you. Oh, so I can be a blessing to you, you, you. I gotta be a blessing to you. Oh, I'm here to be a blessing to you and you, and especially you. Oh, now I know why you keep blessing me. 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 Now I know why, now I know why, now I know why. Now I know why you keep blessing me. I know why you keep on blessing me. I get it now. I understand. So I can be a blessing to you. So y'all go out there, do that work. Bless somebody with the little or the much that you have. It's enough. I love y'all. Thank you for having me. Man, you all continue to do this powerful work. Flourish Agenda, Montclair State, Bree, all you guys. Thank you so much. I love y'all. Peace. Whew.
Wow. Lauren, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that blessing. I really need it tonight, Brie. I don't know about you. Yeah, talk about Healing Center and engagement. I'm so excited to continue to work with V and Farima around this, and Sean, and look forward to continuing to work with the Flourish Agenda. Friends, thank you so much for joining us here, whether on Zoom or on Facebook. We hope that you too are leaving with feeling some beginning to some healing, some beginning to understand all that's happening now, and that this conversation does not stop here, but that it continues from here, and that you're continuing to continue this conversation with your community. And so if you haven't already done so, we'll ask for you to please do. We'd love to hear from you. So we dropped a link both on the Facebook page as well as in the Zoom chat. So we would love to hear from you. Otherwise, please be well, be safe, and again, continue to bring this conversation to your space. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. We love you.